going to focus. Hello, people watching on the recording. All right. So our focus today is on the changes and challenges associated with the recent change to the civics test. Our agenda, we're going to first just get a sense of what we already know about the citizenship interview. We're going to do some comparing and contrasting with the old civics test and the new civics test. We're going to talk about some strategies for tackling the new test, share a little bit of resources, and we'll have some time for Q&A. So what I'm hoping to do first is just start with, if you can put in the chat things that you know about the citizenship interview. And I'd like us to focus on the interview itself within this webinar. I know that Allie is going to be interested in finding out whether folks want other webinars to address kind of other questions around citizenship. So for our time together today, we're really focused on the interview and then specifically on the civics test. But I'd love to know what people already know about the interview.
So we've got speaking and writing test.
Mm-hmm.
Very important. Additional questions that aren't included in those to study. That is what we have heard, okay? 4 parts: speaking, writing, reading, and civics questions. Don't know much. That's okay. Thank you for being here. Roulette for which questions they get. Okay, right. No rhyme or reason. Kind of depends on the officer. Person's history and 400 answers. Ooh, taxes. The thing we all like talking about. That's coming for us soon. Learn how to help students. Discretionary measures for determining good moral character. Ooh. Challenging vocabulary on the interview related to a person's history. High anxiety inducing.
Definitely. Yes, they're evaluating their English. Yeah. Wonderful.
Good. So kind of the full spectrum of
Right.
not much to know a lot about it. Great.
All right. So for today's purpose, again, our focus is going to be on the civics test, but I do just want to frame it within, there are basically 4 tests. They're evaluating your speaking and understanding of English. They do that to varying degrees. It's going to depend on your officer, but an officer might be asking like some chit-chat questions. They might ask some questions that are not on your application that are geared towards getting a sense of your English level. And then they also orally go through some or all of the questions from your citizenship application. And all of that is also giving them a chance to assess your speaking and understanding. There is a reading test and a writing test. As of right now, neither of those have been changed. The N400 questions have not been changed as of now since June of 2024. So those pieces are still the same. I do get a sense, and I have a sense that the training that the officers are receiving about how strict to be may be different than what it had been before. But it has also always been the officers' discretion whether they asked, for example, all of the questions on the N400 or they only asked a sampling of those. The officer has discretion. There's a criteria for what counts as passing the writing test, but at the end of the day, the officer is making the determination as to whether they think your spelling is close enough or not to what they're expecting to see, to what perfect spelling would be. So my general sense has been that we should be preparing our students for sort of the strictest interpretation. And I will also be applying that to on the civics test, that my recommendation for our students is that they are being very precise about making sure that they are saying one of the USCIS approved responses. So USCIS provides the questions and their sort of recommended responses. They officially say you do not have to say it exactly that way, but these are, they recommend that you learn it this way. But the I think our students should give the officers what they are expecting to hear to the extent possible to increase their chances of passing, that we don't leave those civics test answers up to the officer's judgment as to whether what the student said matches the answer that they were expecting to hear. So you'll see that throughout this, that I'm really working with our students on the precise answers that USCIS has provided as their recommended responses. All right. So we're focusing in here on the civics test. On the 2008, which is the old civics test, had been created and released. Well, it had been created over a number of years, released in 2008. So people whose applications were filed, their citizenship applications were filed with USCIS by October 18th, should be taking the old civics test. People whose applications are filed after October 18th, so October 20th on, October 19th was a Sunday, so after October 18th, or who have not yet applied, they need to learn the new civics test. For us, that's the bulk of our students, and so that's where we've really been investing a lot of our time. The old test had 100 questions. The new test has 128 questions. It's called the 2025 civics test because that's when it was released. It was released this past fall. All right, so let's dive into that. It's not just they've added 28 questions, so we really need to dig into to how the 100 converted into 128. So I love a Venn diagram. So 45 of the questions and their answers are still the same. So for example, they have not changed the questions or answers about the stars and stripes on the flag or the national anthem. There's a good number of the history questions where the question and the recommended answer choices are still the same. There are a few questions about the Constitution, and then some of the questions about the government where the questions and answers are the same as they were on the 2008 test. Again, it's a total of 45 questions where the question and answer are unchanged of the original 100. There are 20 that have just been on the old test that do not appear anymore. The bulk of those are the geography questions. Most of the geography questions have been eliminated. There were a couple of questions about political parties on the old test. Those have been eliminated. And then there's a few other random ones. And I'm just putting Woodrow Wilson up as an example. That's one where we used to have to know Woodrow Wilson. We don't need to know him anymore. There are 35 questions that are somewhat changed, where the topic is the same, but there is some change in either the wording or something about the question or the answer. So I'm just going to talk through a couple of examples. So for example, on the old test, they asked, we elect a US senator for how many years? And our students would say 6. On the new test, they say, how long is the term for a US senator? So they now need to know the word term within how long is the term for a US senator, but also they now need to say 6 years, right? Because if you just say 6 days, months, years, decades, right? So on the new test, they need to switch from saying 6 to 6 years. It's the same information. How long does the senator get their job? But they've changed the wording of the question and the answer, the specific answer that we need to provide, right? From 6 to 6 years. Another example, this is actually kind of the most common within this category of somewhat changed, is that they flipped what was in the question and what's in the answer. So for example, in the 2008 test, they said, who is in charge of the executive branch? And our students would say president. Now they say the president is in charge of which branch? And our students need to say executive branch. Okay, so it's the same information, but they took what was in the question and the answer and they flipped them. The result is that it changes what language our students have to produce, right? Like before they had to produce president, now they have to produce executive branch, right? When they're speaking in their answer. Um, so the place where find this most striking is that a lot of the really challenging terms like Declaration of Independence, Federalist Papers, Emancipation, Amendment, I'm just using these as a few examples. On the old test, those were in the question such that people had to recognize those words. On the new test, those are in some questions, so they still have to recognize them, but now they have answers where they have to say these terms. So again, in terms of the language they have to produce, it's really ramped it up, right? Being able to recognize Declaration of Independence is easier than saying Declaration of Independence, right? Another example of where the question and the answer swapped, I'm going to give you, because sometimes it's not just that that term that they have to now say that previously was just in the question, now it's in the answer they have to say. Sometimes now the answer has also gotten a lot longer. So for example, on the old test, we had what movement tried to end racial discrimination. So our students had to say civil rights. Now the question is, what did the civil rights movement do? So our students have to say, fought to end racial discrimination, right? Which is a much more challenging in terms of the language you have to produce. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So that's that category that I'm putting on the line there, those 35 questions. And then lastly, we have 48 questions that are new. I do want to pause for just a second. I forgot to mention it. This categorization of the 20, 45, 35, and 48, this was done by a gentleman who has done a lot in citizenship education, who's on some of the kind of national networks of citizenship educators. His name is Bill Bliss. He's with Language and Communication Workshop. And he did a side-by-side of like, here's the old questions and the new questions and seeing where they line up. And I believe Allie is going to share that document with you as part of the follow-up from this webinar. So you'll get to see that with the questions. All right, so 48 new questions. I just want to talk through a little bit to give you a little bit of a flavor. So for example, one of the new questions is, what was the Great Depression? On the old test, we had a question that included the Great Depression. We familiarized our students with the Great Depression, but they did not have to be able to articulate what was the Great Depression. The only USCIS approved response to this question is longest economic recession in modern history. So this is what our officers are expecting the students to say if they get this question on the new test. On the old test, there were only 4 why questions. On the new test, there are 19 why questions. So that, sort of length of response, right, is also built in. Usually why questions have longer responses that are expected. So that was one of the things that struck me in looking at that side-by-side comparison. We have a lot more why questions where we have to explain a reason. There are a number of topics that are new. Just a few examples. The 10th Amendment is on the new test. The Electoral College is on the new test. There are some new wars on the test. The Korean War, Vietnam War, Gulf War. And then there's a number of other topics that are new. This is just a few examples for you. So again, we're going from 100 questions to 128 questions, but there's a lot of change within that 128. Another thing that's noteworthy about that change is that on the old test, students would be asked up to 10 questions, and they had to get 6 correct. On the new test, they'll be asked up to 20 questions, and they need to get 12 correct. So the ratio is still the same, but it just feels a little bit more daunting to our students. we're trying to remind our students, now you can miss 8 before you can only miss 4. It's good. Like, oh, good. We have not had any of our students have an interview with the new test yet. I have heard conflicting reports on whether officers are going to ask all 20 no matter what, or they're just going to stop once you get to 12 correct. So I do not know. I don't know what that's going to look like. We're just preparing our students. You might be asked 20 questions. You're allowed to miss 8. So that's where we are on that. I wanted to stop for just a minute. In terms of those changes between the old test and the new test, Allie, I know you've been keeping an eye on the Q&A. Do we have any questions about those test changes? And if anybody wants to type any questions in real quick.
This is a separate thing, but I will be sending out these slides in the follow-up email, so you will have access to that. I don't see any
Have
questions about.
I have a question. Have they already started doing interviews with the new 2025 version, or are they still doing people that had the before the October 18th date? So they're doing the old version.
So I have a student who told me that her brother had gotten an interview and that he had applied after October 18th. So he had the new civics questions. But she applied before October 18th. So she had her interview. Oh no, in 2 weeks. She has her interview in 2 weeks, and she's still on the old questions. So that's the only example I have. I haven't had any of our students get interviews in December, January, or I have one who's told me that she has an interview, this one that I mentioned, has an interview in mid-February. We normally have, somewhere between 3 and 5 students per month with interviews. And so we've had a definite slowdown. And so I don't have any examples yet of folks who've had their interviews. So it's right. It's just going to depend on the applicant. If they applied before October 18th, they'll get the old questions. If they applied after October 18th, they'll get the new questions.
And we did have a clarification, Catherine, that someone was on the site and it says on or after October 20th. And you mentioned October 20th. That's on the USCIS. It was because of like the Sunday, Monday thing.
Exactly. October 20th is a Monday. So because on or after is confusing to my students, I've just been saying by October 18th, if it was in, you're on the old test. After October 18th, which is to say October 19th, which is a Sunday. So they didn't have any file dates on that Sunday. So that's how I've been using it with my students, but it means the same as on or after October 20th, because that's a Monday, it's the switch. Yeah. So sorry, I just use it that way because I think on or after is confusing to my students. So I've gotten in the habit of just saying by October 18th or after October 18th.
We do have a question about, do you know the reason they have instilled these changes? Is this purposeful to try and trip up students, or is there any reasoning behind it?
Well, I can just say that they had during the final year of the first Trump administration had planned a pilot of changing the questions. They did say at the time that they wanted to sort of build up the amount of civic knowledge that people had to have. They then had to cancel the pilots because of COVID. And so then during the lame duck window between the November 2020 election and basically it happened in December, they, despite not having been able to do the big pilot that had been planned, they then just released, these are our new questions. They had at the time 128 questions. And then when Biden took office, he immediately canceled that change. So originally there was a 2020 test that was released for about 6 weeks. When the Trump administration came back in this year, This past summer, the new USCIS director was uh, approved by the Senate and took over. And he did specifically say, we need to make this more challenging. We're going to make it more challenging in a variety of ways. And then 2 months later, they released the 2025 128 questions that had a very few edits from the 2021 28 questions. So this is basically a re-release of their intended change from the final year of the previous Trump administration.
I have a couple questions. What prior to 2008, when had it been changed? Do you know? Is it
I
usually
think it was
changed every?
no, I think it had been a while. There was actually in the early 2000s, there was a movement to like, let's clean this up, let's tighten it up. It's kind of varying. People are doing different things. And so there was actually sort of a multi-year effort to try to get a new test developed. And then from there was like to try to get the administration to agree to make a new test. And then once they did, there was a 2 or 3 year process that involved a ton of stakeholders, extensive piloting, like multiple hundreds of thousands of people involved in the pilot. And when they released the new questions in 2008, they said they would not go into effect for a year so that people could transition between the old test and the new test. And unfortunately, this time they said it went into effect in a month instead of a year.
So the gentleman who did the analysis on these questions, 20 are out, 45 are changed, did he make any kind of assessment of a change in difficulty level?
Not in the document that he has. It's just a side by side. But I have been on a webinar where he spoke, and I think it is fair to say he, like me, feels that there's a significant increase in the difficulty level.
And do we have enough data yet? Do we have enough people who have taken the new test to know that?
No. Right. As I said, I only know of one student's brother who's had the new test.
Okay.
So yeah, my guess is it's even nationally, that it's a very small number because they're usually between when you apply, it's usually, 6 months before you get your interview. So we haven't really hit the window where people who applied after October 18th would normally be getting their interviews anyway.
And what's the normal passing rate? Do you know?
It's in I want to say the low 90s, but I can double check that for you. Low to mid 90s, and that might be off of 2 tries. But I can find they usually post that data. I don't know if they have kept that data on the USCIS website, but historically they have included that data on the USCIS website. So we can check and have Allie include that in the follow-up.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions on the changes between 2008 test and 2025 test? All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and dive into the strategies and resources. But Allie's the chat will be open, and we'll have more time for questions at the end. So as you're thinking of other questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. All right. So in light of all of these changes, how do we conquer these challenges? So I'm going to talk through some of the strategies that we have been using, and then I'll share a free resource that we have created and that's available to everybody. I do want to say, so we are 2/3 of the way through teaching the new content. We are running a 6-week winter intensive. We have 2 classes. We have a morning Zoom class and an evening Zoom class. So we got sort of 2 sections of students. We have myself. Allie's actually one of our volunteer teachers. Yay, Allie. And then we have 2 other volunteer teachers. So we have 4 of us that are teaching the new content, and then, consulting and giving each other feedback on where are points that students are getting confused, where are things where we need to build in more clarification. So we have been working a lot with this new content. And so I'm hoping that, it will be helpful to you all to hear sort of what we've seen so far. All right, so in terms of strategies, that's where we're going to start. One of my biggest recommendations is to be very strategic in selecting the response options that you teach your students. In general, I do not, and the other organizations that I've connected with through national networks, I have not heard anybody who recommends teaching all of the response options, but rather pick response options that you have your students learn. If they are learning other ones that are correct, we're always like, yes, that's another option. That's fine. They may hear other options if they're doing their own YouTube searches and finding videos and places to learn some of the questions on their own. But in terms of our, use of time, we try to strategically select response options that we think are going to work best for our students. All right, so let me give you an example. This is one of the new questions. Name two important ideas from the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. The response options that USCIS provides are equality, liberty, social contract, natural rights, limited government, and self-government. So we have to pick which two are we gonna focus on having our students learn. So our general approach is to start by finding, are there other questions where they need to know that word anyways, right? So for example, there are two other questions with the word liberty on the test. So they already have to be familiar with liberty, and we've got a good visual cue for liberty, right? Because they're learning this, where is the Statue of Liberty? So now we've got a visual cue and familiarity. So we're going to use liberty as one of our two response options. There's another question where the U.S. Constitution starts with the words "we the people." What does "we the people" mean? Where our students have to produce self-government. They have to say self-government as an answer to another question. So let's have them use self-government here also, so that words they're already learning to say they can use in multiple places, right? And we've got a visual that we're using to represent self-government that we can use for the other question about self-government and for this question. So now we're going to use liberty and self-government as our two answers to this question. Okay? You can do this throughout the test. There are, for most questions, for a lot of questions, there are multiple options that USCIS recommends. And so our general approach is to, first, is there an option that they have to produce elsewhere? So they're learning to say it already, and then they can say it for this one also. If not, is there at least another question where they're having to recognize that term, right? So that would be sort of second tier choice. And then obviously, if it's something where we can have a visual, we can have a very, a visual that's going to help make it clear. That's also sort of in the, kind of criteria of when we're trying to decide which one are we going to use as the response option that we teach. Which brings me to our next strategy is we are going very heavy on visual supports. Again, because the language on this test is really hard, right? So we use visual supports for the question. So like this question, again, is named two important ideas from the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. So there's a whole set of questions on the Declaration of Independence. There's a set of questions on the Constitution. So we know what those look like. We recognize those visuals. So we use visual supports to help understand the question, and we use visual supports for the answer. We pull those visual supports whenever we're then like, okay, so here's the question, what's our answer? And we're practicing it together. We pull those visual supports into those times where we're practicing then the question and the answer together. We also use visual supports in other ways, like, for example, just like memory cues, right? So like they could learn that our senator is Mark Warner or Tim Kaine. They only have to say their last name. So I've got a picture of a cane, and that's how we remember that one of our senators is Tim Kaine. Our students are having trouble saying Spanberger. So we're showing a hamburger, right? They know how to say hamburger, so then they use that to help them remember Spanburger, right? So sometimes it's just a memory tool, and in that case, it's actually a pronunciation support as well, right? So visual supports all over the place. We're trying to build that in as much as possible. We also build in language supports in a variety of ways. So we need language supports in terms of helping them understand. I know that it's we're always kind of walking the line between how much context and understanding are we trying to incorporate versus just memorize and spit it out. We know in the world of social studies education that your ability to remember and memorize and spit it out is enhanced if you have at least some understanding and some context. So we try to find where's the line where we can give enough understanding and context that helps them with that memorization. So for example, we do explicitly teach some key words. We try to focus on words that are definitely words that are in the answers, words that are in the questions, and particularly words that come up a lot, right? So the word branches comes up in tons of places on the test. And so we definitely want to make sure that our students are clear on branches. And so I've got I use a tree because it's a branch, but then it's also the parts of government, right? So I'm kind of tying together the visual support and the language support. We need to be conscious of how many words mean more than one thing in English that are on our civics test. So with the new addition of the word electoral college, we need to make sure, usually when you think college, this is what you're thinking of. Electoral college, no, it's a completely different thing, right? So then you can get into explaining electoral college, but you want to do those clarifications. Cabinet is another really common one, right? Like we show a picture of a kitchen cabinet. We know it's super confusing, but the president's cabinet is not the same kind that's in your kitchen, right? As I said before, the word term, we've added some questions that ask about the term of a U.S. senator, the term of a U.S. representative. They might, in their English classes, be using term to mean like vocabulary word, right? So we need to clarify. I remember the first time I was teaching citizenship at the local library, and one of my students, I was talking about how you can run for office, and one of my students like raises his hand and he's like, run? And I was like, oh, good point. Right. I'm so sorry. English is such a mess. So we try to really identify what are the words that are on this that mean multiple things in English and help them know which meaning we're talking about. Okay, so that's another part of the language support. Another piece really comes down to question words. So we try to give lots of supports to help our students know question words. They need to know this for the speaking and understanding and for 100 part of the interview as well. It's become especially important because some of our test changes, like here's a good example, the only thing that changed is the question word. So we're finding it very common that when we're practicing and we say, okay, what is Independence Day? Our returning students who had already learned the old test are saying 4th of July, right? So trying to help students realize, okay, the question word has changed. And now when we're asking, it's what is Independence Day, right? So some of those, it's tied in with the changes in the test and support around question words. We also are trying to identify, are there places where we can help them recognize that the keywords in the answer are also in the question, right? So for example, what war did the Americans fight to win independence from Britain? War for independence. I will confess this is another one that I think is a good example of strategic selection of the response options. The other response options are American Revolution or American Revolutionary War. That's how I always learned it. I never called it the War for Independence, but USCIS also gives us the option of War for Independence. They already are producing the word independence in questions about the Declaration of Independence. There is nowhere in the 2025 test that they need to produce American Revolution or American Revolutionary War. So I'm not going to try to make them produce it if I can let them produce a word they already are learning for somewhere else, right? And this one has the double bonus of the words are in the question and then they're in the answer, right? There's a question about some states have more representatives than other states. Why? Some states have more people, right? The word is the phrase, some states have more is in the question and in one of the response options. So that's the response option I'm using so that I can use that language support. It's in the question and it's in the answer. We're also seeing that with so many more challenging words that they have to produce in their answer that previously they just had to recognize, we're having to do a lot more pronunciation support. So we're stopping to spend time independence, right? Like taking those words apart. There's a lot of tough words in the new answers. So really focusing on helping them say those words and take apart those syllables has been super important for our students so far. Another one kind of in the same vein is a lot of students don't know how if they see 1776 as, you know, July 4th, 1776, they don't realize that we say it 1776, right? So they're trying to say a bunch of numbers and they kind of jumble over that. We want them to come across as confident. We want them to be confident and come across clearly in their interviews. So even things like this, where we're stopping to point out, okay, how do we say this year, 1776, this has been helpful for our students. As I said earlier, when I was pointing out the changes, a lot of the new responses are longer, right? Like I had the example above of fought to end racial discrimination, right? So that's like trying to produce that is tough. This one, the question is, why can the president only serve 2 terms? This is another of our new questions. And our USCIS recommended response option to keep the president from becoming too powerful. That's a lot, right? So we try to break into chunks. Usually we try to do 3 chunks to keep the president from becoming too powerful, right? So we'll go through and we'll repeat. We're working on those chunks to keep the president from becoming too powerful, to help them be able to produce those long responses. All right, next I have practice with varying combinations, formats, and supports. So let me show you some of the ways we do that. All right, so we do a lot of questions that sound similar, or in some cases start with the same words, like what is the capital of the United States and what is the capital of your state? Right? So we'll stop and we'll put those together. Usually we'll put up a slide, exactly this slide, and then we'll be like, okay, let's practice those. There's 2 questions about the flag. Why does the flag have 13 stars? Excuse me, 13 stripes. Why does the flag have 50 stars, right? They both start with why does the flag have? And students will go ahead and in their mind, they're already anticipating which one it is, and they'll answer it. Oh, they know the answer, but they need to make sure that they stop and listen to the whole question. So we'll do those as sets to try and really work on make sure you're listening to the question because the question sounds similar. We'll go through and we'll group like, all right, let's look at all of the questions where you have to name one. And we'll practice all of those together. Let's look at all the questions where you have to name 2. And we'll practice all of those together. Right? Because it's pretty common, again, that the students will hear like name 1, and then they'll give the answer, right? Oh, name 1 American innovation. And they're saying airplane, but there's also name 1 American Indian tribe, right? So the officer might say, name 1 American, and they're saying innovation, but the student's already gone to Hopi because they were thinking of a different name 1 answer, right? Name 1 reason colonists came to America. Name 1 reason the Americans declared their independence, right? So looking at those together so they can make sure that they're catching those commonalities and where they need to have different answers. We try to go through and use charts where it makes sense, right? Like where we're learning all about the Senate and we learn all about the House, and now let's see how they fit together. Their terms, their how many members there are, who they represent, et cetera. Like see how those fit side by side. We'll clump together again after we've learned them. We'll go back and review with, okay, so what are all the questions that have the answer is the president, right? Who signs bills into law? Who vetoes bills? Who's the commander in chief? Who appoints judges, right? So you can put together, let's see all the ones that have the same answer. We try to put together like all the questions about, this one is the founding fathers, right? We'll do all the questions about current officials. We'll do when we get further in, we do all the questions with your answer is going to be the name of a person, right? So trying to think about what are ways that you're learning them in sort of logical places, but then how do you pull them together to by category, right? We usually do a round where we'll be like all of the questions where there's a number in the answer, right? And so let's look at all of those together. We sometimes we call it which picture. We'll be like, okay, which picture? And that's trying to help draw distinctions, right? So for example, Pledge of Allegiance and Oath of Allegiance, right? That's hard. So we try to make sure we're sometimes doing things like this where we're putting them side by side so that they can associate what each of those means. So we'll do which picture. We sometimes also do a lot of activities where it's like, is it answer one or answer two? All right. Another thing that we do in our group classes is after we've taught the background information about the question. Usually we'll do a few questions and then we'll stop and we'll read the questions. And usually what we do is, for example, I would say, okay, everybody, I'm Officer McCall. I'm going to read the question. You're all in your interview and you're going to answer. Ready? Name two important ideas from the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. And then people will answer the response that we've been learning. And then I'll say, okay, Oscar, do you want to turn to be the officer? Yes. All right, Officer Oscar, you read the question. And the rest of us are in our interview. All right, Officer Oscar, go ahead. And now Oscar reads the question. So the students are hearing it from two different voices, two different accents, and they're getting that repetition as well, right? It also helps the students feel more confident when they are taking turns being the officer, right? They get to pretend they're the officer. And so it's, they're sort of seeing it from that perspective and kind of building their confidence a little bit, right? And it's a little bit of extra reading practice. It doesn't exactly line up with the items on the reading test, but there is some overlap. And so it's that little extra practice with reading as well. We always end our group classes with opportunities for students to feel like they're getting a little mini interview, because answering chorally is different than answering individually, right? And feeling like it's a pretend interview just feels a little bit different. So what we do at the end of every class is we'll say, okay, we're going to do a little mini, you're going to get a little tiny mini interview. Dixie, would you like a turn? Yes. All right, Dixie, here we go. In the waiting room now, Dixie. And then Dixie will say, yes. Hello, I'm Officer Catherine. Please follow me to my office. How long was your drive? And Dixie will tell me it took her 2 hours. Okay, great. All right, come on into my office. Wonderful. Go ahead and have a seat. We're going to start with the civics questions. And then I'll do 3 civics questions, right? Dixie will go. Sometimes she's having a hard time. This is an opportunity to reinforce. She can ask me to repeat. She can ask me to say it slower. She can say, I don't know, because she can get up to 8 wrong, and that's fine. I'll go ahead to the next question, right? So getting to sort of get the feel of those pieces is an extra bonus of getting doing these little one-on-one mini practice interview with the class together. Usually we try to get in at least 3 or 4 of those at the end of class. And then, okay, everyone, it's everyone's practice interview. technically we're just back to choral response, but again, it feels different when I say, hello, everyone. I'm Officer Catherine. Can you all follow me to my very large office for our group interview? Right? And then they come in. Okay, everyone have a seat. How was your drive? Right? So getting to have everybody have a chance to feel like it's their pretend practice interview, it lets the students who are much more nervous about doing it one-on-one in front of the class still get a chance to do it. And again, it just sort of feels different when you're pretending it's a practice interview than when you're just saying, okay, everyone shout out the answers to these questions. When we do both our choral practice, over the course of the class where people are just shouting out, and when we do our one-on-one individual practice, we use a variety of supports of what they're seeing. Sometimes they can see both the question, the written question, and the visuals. Sometimes we just let them see the visuals and we're saying the question. Sometimes they can see the written question. We always have a little pretend officer. AI generated a lot of little pretend officers for me. So they have a little pretend officer. Okay, let's imagine this is Officer Becky. And then I'll read the question so they can see it written, and then they'll answer. And we sometimes practice as it will be in their interview, where there's no visuals and no words, right? It's just an oral. The civics test is an oral test. So we sometimes practice it where they do not see any visuals or any words, right? And we generally, we build that. So in the earlier rounds, they're having more support, less support, until they're just practicing it with just hearing the questions. So that's the range of supports and strategies that we use. Ta-da. I want to take a minute to show you our free, available to all of you resource that you are welcome to access and use. So let me just take a minute to change my share. All right. So we have a set of videos that we made for all 128 new questions. So I'm going to show you a tiny bit. Why does the flag have 50 stars? On the US flag, the number of stars is always the same as the number of states. When we were I'm going to mute myself. We don't have to listen to me. But you can see what we try to do for each question in these videos is do, again, a little bit of background, very heavy on the visuals, and then we'll do the question, the answer that we're learning, and then let me zip myself forward a tiny bit, right? So we'll have the question, the answer that we're learning, and then we practice it. Why does the flag have 50 stars? You'll say, because there are 50 states. So we do round, so we do a round. Oh, sorry, got a commercial in there. Sorry. So we do an opportunity to practice like as if it's the interview where I give them time to give their answer and then I'll say the answer. You can see over here on the left, it's 19 videos. They're generally around 10 minutes or so each. And we've created these for all of the new questions. We do also have a set of videos that's for the English for the interview. So we go through all the questions about you from the N400. We have a set of videos that we do all the yes and no questions from the N400. We have a set of videos where we do all of the reading and writing possible words, and we combine them into possible reading questions, sentences, and possible writing sentences. So we also have a set of the old civics. And so Allie is going to send you access to all of our videos. But because we're focused today on the new questions, that's why I'm sort of highlighting for you that we have videos made for all of the new questions. All right, so let me get that out of our way. There we go. Okay, so we are back to questions.